The lights inside the Astor Pavilion didn't just shine. They cut. White beams sliced across the runway like blades, turning every inch of velvet, every blink of mascara, every tremble in a hand into something undeniable. 1,000 faces leaned forward in the dark, investors, editors, stylists, executives, people who could make a name immortal with a single sentence. At the end of the runway, Lena Ashford stood perfectly still as if she'd been carved out of night. Her dress, deep velvet midnight blue, held the light like a secret. It didn't sparkle. It didn't beg. It simply owned the room the way the ocean owns the moon. Behind her, the giant screen flashed the minimalist signature that had haunted the fashion world for years: E.V. The crowd erupted, then hushed again like a wave pulling back. And that's when the doors opened. Not the graceful swing of an attendant, not the careful entrance of a late guest. This was a hard, ugly shove. A man stumbled into the light as if he'd been pushed by the building itself. His suit jacket hung crooked, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscle jumped. Victor Kane, tech mogul, media darling, founder of Kane Dynamics, the man whose name used to glide across headlines like a promise. Tonight, his name felt like a threat that had lost its teeth. He stepped onto the runway like a man stepping onto a landmine. Lena, his voice cracked with something that wasn't grief or love. It was panic, raw and unfiltered. "What is this? What did you do?" She didn't flinch. She didn't even turn fully toward him, just angled her face enough for the cameras to catch the calm line of her cheek, the quiet brightness in her eyes. The microphones hung above the runway like metal fruit hungry for disaster. Victor spread his hands as if the gesture could pull the audience to his side. She's lying. She's always been." He stopped because the front row had started to stand. Not the editors, not the models. Men and women in plain clothes, with earpieces, moving with a trained, unhurried certainty. The kind of certainty that didn't need applause. One of them flashed a badge just long enough for the cameras to catch a glint. FBI. The crowd made a sound that was half gasp, half prayer. Victor's face drained so quickly, it looked like the color was being erased in real time, like someone had taken the world's grayest paintbrush and dragged it across his skin. "Victor Kane," a voice said, calm, firm. "You need to come with us." Victor turned toward Lena like she was the only solid thing left to hold on to. His eyes, those eyes that once looked at her as if she were a stain, now searched her like she was the answer to a question he'd been too proud to ask. "You can't," he whispered, frantic. "You can't do this to me." Lena's smile was so small it could have been mistaken for mercy. But mercy wasn't what she'd brought tonight. "I'm not doing anything to you," she said softly, her voice carried perfectly through the auditorium. She paused, letting the words settle like dust. "You did this to yourself." Victor's mouth opened and nothing came out. And in the silence beneath the lights and the stunned breathing of 1,000 strangers, Lena could hear it, the same sound that had haunted her for 3 years. A distant, steady hum, like servers running behind a locked door. The sound of systems. The sound of control. The sound of a man who thought he owned the world, forgetting that the world could lock him out. She lifted her chin toward the audience, her gaze sweeping over them like a queen measuring her kingdom. "This," she said, "is my debut." Victor took one step back. The agents moved in, and as the handcuffs clicked, Lena's eyes drifted just for a second to the edge of the stage, where a familiar figure watched with a quiet, knowing stillness. Adrian Blackwell. He didn't clap. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once, like a judge signing a sentence. Lena breathed in. Velvet. Warm stage lights. A faint trace of rain from the open doors. And then, the story didn't begin here. To understand why Victor Kane was collapsing under the glare of her runway. To understand why a woman the world barely knew had become the storm that ended him. We have to go back. Back to the color gray. Back to the house where silence was required. Back to the marriage that looked peaceful from the outside because no one could hear her disappearing. The penthouse in Harbor Point was designed like a monument. Glass walls, polished stone, a view that made the city feel small. Everything in it looked expensive in a way that refused to be warm. And everything in it belonged to Victor. The first rule Lena learned wasn't spoken like a rule. It was spoken like a compliment. "That color suits you," Victor said the first time he handed her a dress he'd chosen. It was gray, not silver, not pearl. Gray like fog, gray like concrete, gray like the space between words. Lena held it up in the bedroom mirror and tried to smile. "It's simple." "That's the point," Victor replied, tightening his tie with a smooth, practiced motion. He didn't look at her reflection. He looked at himself. "You don't need attention. We have enough attention." His tone was almost gentle, almost, as if he were gifting her relief, as if invisibility was peace. Later, Lena would realize this was Victor's favorite trick to dress control as kindness. He ran a company that harvested data with the precision of surgeons. He knew exactly how to make people offer their secrets and call it convenience. At home, he used the same skill. He didn't need to raise his voice often. The house itself carried his commands through schedules, through staff, through a quiet pressure that wrapped around Lena's life like plastic. The second rule arrived in pieces. A comment when she laughed too loudly at dinner. A sharp glance when she spoke to an executive's wife at a charity event. A clipped not necessary when she tried to wear a bright lipstick. Victor didn't call it isolation. He called it protecting the brand. "We need peace at home," he would say, as if home was a boardroom. No drama, no headlines, no distractions. Lena learned to walk softly, to speak softly, to keep her hands folded in her lap even when her stomach twisted with questions she wasn't allowed to ask. The third rule was the most brutal, because it wore a smile. Camille Laurent, Victor's executive assistant, sharp, elegant, always holding a tablet like a weapon. She had the kind of beauty that looked engineered, flawless hair, controlled gestures, a laugh that sounded like it was calibrated for the room. The first time Lena met her, Camille kissed Victor's cheek lightly and said, "Good to see you, Victor." Then she turned to Lena with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Kane, you're lovely, lovely. Not brilliant, not fascinating, not important, just decorative." Later, when Victor and Camille walked ahead of Lena at events, their shoulders nearly brushing, their conversation flowing like Lena wasn't there, she understood that lovely was another shade of gray. Camille was always nearby. At breakfast, discussing market sentiment as if it were weather. At lunch, suggesting which donors deserved a call. At night, texting Victor at hours that felt too intimate to be professional. Lena tried at first to convince herself she was imagining the closeness, that her jealousy was childish, that she was lucky to be married to a man the world admired. But there were moments that cracked the illusion, a hand lingering too long on Victor's forearm, a private joke that made Camille's mouth curve while Victor's eyes softened in a way Lena hadn't seen aimed at her in months. And then, the worst, the way Victor didn't even bother to hide it. At a corporate gala, surrounded by cameras and champagne, Camille adjusted Victor's cufflinks and he let her. Lena stood beside him like a piece of furniture. An older investor's wife leaned toward Lena and whispered, half pitying, half curious, "Is she family?" Lena's cheeks burned. Victor didn't correct the woman. He simply smiled at Camille and said, "Thank you." That night, in the car on the way home, Lena finally spoke. "Victor, people notice." Victor didn't look up from his phone. The glow lit his face like a mask. "Let them." "She touches you," Lena said, forcing the words out as if they were glass. She acts like." Victor exhaled, slow and irritated, like she'd asked a dumb question in a meeting. "Camille is competent. She makes my life easier. And I don't." That got his attention. He turned his head slightly, just enough to make Lena's pulse jump. His eyes were calm. His calm was terrifying. "You keep the house quiet," he said. "You keep the appearance stable." He paused, and the pause felt deliberate, like a surgeon choosing where to cut. "That's what you're good at." Lena stared out the window at the city lights, blurring in the rain. The silence in the car felt like a sentence, and somewhere beneath that silence she swore she could hear it already. The faint hum of servers, the sound of Victor's world running without her. Over time, Lena stopped fighting the gray, not because she agreed with it, because fighting made the house colder. Victor had a talent for punishment that left no bruises. If Lena challenged him, he didn't shout. He withdrew. He became busy. He became reasonable, which was worse because he made her feel irrational for wanting basic respect. And the staff watched, always careful, always quiet, like they were living in a museum. The penthouse became a place where Lena's emotions felt like contraband. One evening, Victor hosted a dinner for Kane Dynamics' board. The dining table was long and glossy. Crystal glasses, white plates. Flowers arranged so perfectly they looked fake. Lena wore the dress Victor had picked, gray silk high neckline sleeves long enough to hide her wrists. She looked like she was dressed for a funeral she wasn't allowed to mourn. The guests arrived in bright colors and confident laughter. Lena smiled, poured wine, listened, and then the conversation turned like it always did to Victor. His achievements, his vision, his leadership. A board member raised his glass. "Victor, you're building the future." Victor accepted the praise like it was his birthright. Camille sat at his right hand, laughing at the right moments, sliding documents toward him like a loyal conspirator. Lena sat at his left, like a shadow. At some point, a board member's husband, slightly drunk, overly friendly, turned to Lena and said, "So, Mrs. Kane, what do you do all day? Shopping yoga?" The table chuckled. Lena's smile tightened. Victor cut in smoothly, not even glancing at her. "She keeps the house running. She's very domestic." Domestic. The word landed like a slap. Camille tilted her head, amused. "It's not easy," she added sweetly, "being married to a man like Victor. It takes patience." More laughter. Lena's throat constricted. She saw the scene like a camera pulling back the table, the wine, the polished faces, Victor at the center like a king, and Lena, an accessory. A cautionary example. A woman being erased in public while pretending it wasn't happening. She gripped her napkin so hard her fingers ached. Victor leaned back in his chair and said, almost casually, "Lena never cared about the business world. She's not really educated in that way." His tone wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was dismissive. Final. A board member nodded sympathetically at Lena, as if she were a child. "Well, not everyone needs ambition, right?" The laughter returned, softer this time, like a lullaby meant to keep her quiet. Lena excused herself. In the bathroom, she locked the door and stared at her reflection. Gray dress, pale face, eyes too bright with unshed anger. She pressed her hands to the counter, breathing through the tightness in her chest. "Don't cry. Don't cry. Don't give them the satisfaction." She splashed water on her wrists. The water was cold, and it reminded her of something she couldn't name. A studio. Fabric. Her fingers moving with purpose. For a second, a memory flickered bright and dangerous. Then the door knocked. Mrs. Kane, a staff member's voice. "Are you all right?" Lena forced her expression to smooth. "Yes, I'm fine." Fine was another color in Victor's palette. That night, after the guests left, Victor didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't apologize. He simply loosened his tie and said, "You handled yourself well, no drama." Lena stared at him, the words trembling on her tongue. "I am not furniture." Instead, she said goodnight. She went to the bedroom. And when the door closed behind her, Lena walked to the far corner of the closet, past the rows of gray, past the neatly arranged shoes Victor preferred. At the very back, hidden behind winter coats, was a small, old laptop. It looked out of place in the sleek penthouse, like a relic from another life. Lena's hands shook as she opened it. The screen flickered. The desktop loaded slowly, the fan whirring like a quiet sigh. She clicked on a folder labeled with 3 plain letters, E.V. Inside were sketches. Hundreds, thousands. Dress silhouettes drawn with bold lines. Notes about fabric weight, movement, seam placement. Color palettes that burned like sunsets. A name appeared on the first file's corner, typed clean, unmistakable Irene Vale. Her secret. Her other self. The genius the world searched for, whispered about, begged to meet. E. was the designer whose pieces sold out in minutes, whose runway shows became legend, whose anonymity became part of the myth. E. V. was the woman Lena had been before the gray. Lena pressed her fingertips to the screen like she could touch that version of herself through glass. The penthouse around her was silent, but in her mind, she heard the sound of fabric being cut, pins sliding into place, a needle piercing cloth with certainty. She whispered, barely audible, "I'm still here." But when she looked up at her reflection in the laptop screen, she saw fear. Not fear of Victor's anger. Fear that she'd been invisible for so long she might not remember how to be seen. The invitation arrived on thick paper, embossed in gold. Blackwell, Foundation Gala. The Halcyon Museum, formal attire required. Victor held it between two fingers like it was a contract. "This matters," he said, already calculating. "Adrian Blackwell will be there." Lena knew the name. Everyone did. Adrian Blackwell wasn't a celebrity in the loud way. He didn't chase cameras. Cameras chased him, and he moved like he didn't notice. He was the man rumored to have saved companies with a single phone call, ruined others with a single silence. A patron of art, of science, of quiet power. Victor's jaw tightened with something close to hunger. "If I can get 10 minutes with him, we secure the Harbor Point expansion." He turned to Lena. "You're coming." Lena's stomach tightened. Events meant smiling, standing, being displayed. Victor opened a garment bag and revealed a dress. Gray, of course. More expensive than any gray she'd worn before. The fabric was smooth, the cut precise, designed to make her look elegant without attracting attention. "It's perfect," Victor said. Lena stared at it. Perfect for disappearing. Her voice came out softer than she intended. "Could I wear something else?" Victor blinked as if she'd spoken in a language he didn't recognize. "What else?" he asked, and there was a warning buried in the calm. Lena swallowed. "Something with color." Victor's lips pressed together. He exhaled through his nose. "Lena," he said, slow, patient, the way one speaks to someone refusing to understand reality. "This is not about you." He stepped closer and lifted her chin with 2 fingers. The gesture might have looked affectionate to an outsider. To Lena, it felt like a collar. "You're my wife," he said. "You represent me, and I need peace at home. I need stability." His eyes sharpened. "Don't make this difficult." Lena's throat tightened. She nodded, because nodding was how she survived. But that night, alone in the closet, she pulled out something hidden beneath the gray. A garment bag she'd kept sealed like a vow. Inside was a dress she'd designed in the quiet hours when Victor slept, and the penthouse hummed with servers and security systems. Velvet, midnight blue, a dress that didn't plead for attention, it commanded it. She ran her hand over the fabric. It felt like darkness with a pulse. She whispered to it, "Let's see if I remember how to breathe." The night of the gala arrived with rain. Harbor Point streets gleamed under streetlights like a city made of spilled ink. Victor's car glided to the museum entrance. The Halcyon Museum rose from the night, like a temple column's marble glowing windows. Inside, the air was thick with expensive perfume, art, and ambition. Lena stepped out of the car wearing Victor's gray dress. Cameras flashed. Victor's hand rested on the small of her back, guiding her like a prop. They walked through the entrance past sculptures that looked like frozen screams, past paintings worth more than most people's homes. Victor leaned close to Lena's ear. "Smile," he murmured. "You're doing fine." "Fine." Lena's smile held. They entered the main hall, and then Lena stopped. Not because she was overwhelmed, because she saw herself in the mirror panel near the staircase. Gray. Small. Safe. Invisible. Her chest tightened, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Victor didn't notice. He was scanning the room for Adrian Blackwell like a hunter. Lena's hands moved to her clutch. She felt the weight of a keycard inside. She'd planned this. She'd booked a small private room upstairs under her name weeks ago. Victor thought it was for touch-ups. It was for resurrection. "Victor," she said softly, "I need a moment." He frowned, annoyed. "Now, yes," she said, and her voice surprised her, steady, not pleading. Before he could argue, Lena turned and walked away. Victor stared after her, irritation flashing across his face. But he let her go. Because in Victor's world, Lena always came back. Upstairs in the private room, Lena locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. Her hands shook as she opened her garment bag. Midnight blue velvet spilled into her arms like water. She stripped off the gray dress. It fell to the floor in a soft heap like shed skin. For a second, Lena stared at herself in the mirror, bare shoulders, pale skin, eyes bright with fear and something else. Hope. She slid into the velvet dress. The fabric hugged her like a secret kept too long. She adjusted the neckline, pinned her hair differently, added earrings she'd hidden, small but sharp like punctuation. Then she looked up. The woman in the mirror wasn't invisible. She wasn't a supporting character. She was dangerous. Lena whispered, "Hello," and when she opened the door and stepped back into the gala, the hallway lights caught the velvet and the world shifted. Heads turned. Conversations stuttered. A hush spread like heat. Lena walked down the staircase slowly, her posture straight, her chin lifted, not defiant, not begging, simply present. Victor saw her from across the hall. The shock on his face was almost comical, like a man watching his obedient shadow detach and walk away. He crossed the room quickly, smile tight. "What are you wearing?" he hissed, through his teeth not loud enough for others to hear. Lena looked at him calmly. "Something I made." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Go change." "No," she said. One word. Simple. Clean. Victor's hand tightened on her arm just enough to hurt. "Lena," he said low, "don't embarrass me." Lena met his gaze, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't flinch. "You're already embarrassed," she said softly. "You just don't know it yet." Victor's face twitched with anger. Then, like a performer changing masks, he smiled and released her arm, turning to greet an approaching couple. Lena stood alone for a heartbeat, velvet and nerves. Then she heard a voice behind her. "Excuse me." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The room seemed to tilt toward it. Lena turned. A man stood there in a black suit, silver hair, eyes that looked like they'd seen every trick and never been impressed. Adrian Blackwell. His gaze moved over Lena, not in a hungry way, not in a judging way. In the way an expert studies a masterpiece. His eyes dropped to the seam line near her waist, to the shoulder cut, to the way the velvet caught light without cheap shine. Then he smiled just barely. "E.V.," he said. Lena's heart stopped. Victor beside her stiffened. Lena's lips parted. "I'm sorry," Adrian's voice remained calm, certain. "Only one designer in the world uses that seam tension. Only one understands velvet like that." He held Lena's gaze like he was offering her a door. "I've been trying to meet E.V. for years." The room around them seemed to fall away. Lena could feel Victor's attention like a blade at her back. She could feel Camille Laurent watching from across the room, her expression frozen, her smile sharpened into something dangerous. Lena swallowed. She didn't confirm. She didn't deny. Her voice came out steady. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Blackwell." Adrian's eyes warmed with amusement. "It's nice to finally meet you." He turned slightly, gesturing toward the main table near the front of the hall. "There's a seat," he said, "reserved for someone who understands creation." Victor stepped forward quickly, forcing a laugh. "Mr. Blackwell, Victor Kane, Kane Dynamics." "I'd love to." Adrian didn't look at him. Not even a glance. As if Victor's words were background music. Instead, Adrian offered Lena his arm. "Walk with me." The air in the hall changed. People watched. Victor's smile stiffened. His eyes flashed with humiliation. Lena hesitated for half a second. Then she placed her hand lightly on Adrian's arm and walked. And as she moved through the room, she realized something that made her dizzy. The world wasn't ignoring her. It had simply been waiting for her to step out of the gray. At the main table, a chair was pulled out. It wasn't just a chair. It was position, power, visibility. Adrian Blackwell guided Lena into the seat as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Victor stood behind them, expression strained. Camille approached with a smile that could cut glass. "Mr. Blackwell," she purred, so honored. "Victor has been eager to discuss." Adrian raised a hand slightly. Not rude, just final. I'm sure Victor Kane has many eager discussions, he said. His gaze stayed on Lena, but tonight I'm interested in art. Camille's smile faltered for the smallest fraction of a second, then returned controlled. Victor's jaw clenched. He leaned toward Lena, voice low. What did you tell him? Lena didn't look at him. Nothing. Don't play games, Victor hissed. This is my opportunity. Lena finally turned her head. Then maybe you should have earned it, she said. Victor's face reddened. His pride was a living thing, and it had just been stabbed. He forced a laugh louder now for anyone listening. My wife has a flair for drama tonight. Adrian's eyes cooled. Flair, he repeated softly as if tasting the word. Victor continued, desperate to reassert control. She spends her days in the house. She gets ideas from magazines. It's harmless. Harmless. Lena felt the old wound flare. Then Adrian spoke. Harmless people don't build legends, he said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small card, white minimal, with a single mark in blue ink, E. V. I've been offered this signature 3 times, Adrian said, holding the card up. Each time, the designer refused to appear. He looked at Lena with quiet intensity. But genius has a way of showing itself when it's tired of being hidden. The hall around them seemed to hold its breath. Victor's smile cracked. Camille's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. Lena's heart thundered. She could feel 2 lives colliding inside her, the quiet wife and the hidden creator. Adrian placed the card on the table in front of Lena like evidence in a trial. I won't ask you to confirm, he said softly. You don't owe anyone your secrets. He leaned in just slightly. But if you ever want your name back, my door is open. Then he sat back as if the matter was settled. Victor stared at Lena like she'd betrayed him by existing. You think this is funny, he whispered, voice shaking. Lena's lips curved not into a smile but into something like clarity. I think, she said quietly, this is the first time you've looked at me in years. Victor's eyes flashed with anger. But he couldn't explode here. Not in front of Adrian Blackwell, not in front of the room. So Victor did what he always did. He swallowed the rage and promised himself he would punish her later. Lena watched his restraint and felt a strange calm bloom inside her. Because she understood something now, Victor's power wasn't absolute. It depended on rooms like this believing his story. And tonight his story had a crack. Victor expected Lena to follow him home. He expected her to apologize in the car. He expected her to fold back into gray like a frightened paper doll. He expected, because he'd built his life on the expectation that everyone around him existed to maintain his comfort. But Lena didn't return to his side after the gala ended. She didn't trail behind him like a shadow. She left, alone, in the rain, wearing velvet like a declaration. Victor called her phone once, twice, 10 times. When she didn't answer, his messages turned from sharp to cruel to terrified. Come back, don't do this. You're embarrassing yourself. You have nothing without me. Lena didn't respond. She went to a small apartment she'd quietly maintained under a different name, an old habit from a life where anonymity was survival. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall, and finally let herself breathe. For hours, she didn't cry. She just stared at her hands. Hands that had designed gowns the world worshipped. Hands that had been forced to pour tea and smile politely while men laughed at her. In the morning, Lena stood. She looked in the mirror, and she said the words out loud because words were spells and she needed to hear the magic I want a divorce. When Victor received the papers, he didn't call her. He summoned her. He demanded she meet him at the penthouse with their lawyers. Lena arrived wearing a simple black coat, hair pulled back, face calm. Victor was already there, pacing like a caged animal. Camille sat on the sofa, legs crossed, watching Lena with a smile that wasn't quite triumph and wasn't quite fear. Victor pointed at Lena like she was an employee who'd missed a deadline. You want out, he said. Fine. But you're not taking anything. Lena's lawyer, an older woman with eyes like steel, opened a folder. Victor's lawyer smirked. Prenup, he said. She gets a settlement minimal, no claim to company assets. Victor leaned forward, voice dripping condescension. You'll leave with what you came with. nothing more. Lena's lawyer didn't flinch. Actually, she said, sliding documents across the table, we're not here to negotiate what Lena takes. We're here to establish what Victor Kane has no legal right to touch. Victor's eyes narrowed. And what is that? Lena's lawyer opened the folder. Inside were incorporation papers, trademark filings, financial statements, all bearing dates years before Lena married Victor. A single signature repeated across pages like a heartbeat: E. V. Victor's face tightened. His lawyer leaned in confusion, flickering. Camille's smile froze. Lena's lawyer spoke calmly, like a surgeon explaining an incision. Its assets are held under the Ravenscroft Trust, which is structured to be non-invadable. Victor's voice rose sharp. That's impossible. She's my wife. She is your wife, Lena's lawyer agreed. But E.V. was never yours. Victor turned to Lena, eyes blazing. You hid money from me. Lena's voice remained quiet. I hid myself from you. There's a difference. Victor laughed, a hard sound. U.E.V. Don't insult me. Lena's lawyer slid one more document forward. A letter of authentication from a respected fashion house. A sealed statement from a luxury auction firm. Victor's eyes flicked over the evidence and something shifted in his face. Not belief. Not admiration. Fear. Because if Lena was E.V., then all the years he'd treated her like nothing meant he'd been blind. And Victor Kane hated being blind more than he hated being wrong. Camille finally spoke, voice silky. Even if she has some side hobby, Victor built this empire. She can't. Lena looked at Camille for the first time directly. Her gaze was calm, almost gentle. You're right, Lena said softly. I can't take what Victor built. She paused. I don't want it. Victor blinked, caught off guard. Lena stood smoothing her coat. I want my name back, and my life. Victor's hands clenched. You don't get to destroy me and walk away. Lena tilted her head. Destroy you, she smiled faintly, sadly almost. Victor, I'm not destroying you. I'm leaving. She turned to go. Victor's voice snapped behind her, raw now. You'll regret this. Lena didn't look back. But she felt his threat like cold water. And she understood leaving a man like Victor wasn't an exit. It was the start of a war. Victor moved fast. Within days, headlines appeared. Anonymous sources claimed Lena was unstable, that she'd been unfaithful, that she'd stolen from Victor. Photos of her at the gala circulated with captions dripping with implication. Camille appeared on a talk show, smiling sadly, saying Victor has been under so much stress. Lena didn't understand the responsibilities of his world. The world loved a story like that. The sainted billionaire, the ungrateful wife. Lena watched the clips in silence, her stomach twisting. Not because she believed them, because she understood how easily a narrative could become a cage. Adrian Blackwell called her once. Not for gossip, not to save her. His voice was calm. I'm not going to tell you what to do, he said, but I will tell you what Victor is doing. What? Lena asked, throat tight. He's trying to bury you, Adrian said, and he's careless because he thinks you're harmless. Lena stared out the window at rain streaking the glass. That hum returned in her mind, the sound of systems of data. Victor's world. His true religion. Lena whispered. He's not careless. Adrian paused. No, he agreed. He's arrogant. Lena's fingers tightened around her phone. Arrogance was a crack in any fortress. And Lena had lived inside Victor's fortress long enough to know where the cracks were. She'd seen things. Late-night calls. Documents left open on tablets. Security briefings murmured over breakfast. A culture of move fast, break laws. Kane Dynamics handled data like it was oil, and Victor handled rules like they were optional. Lena exhaled slowly. She didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge. She wanted freedom. But Victor was the kind of man who would never let her be free unless he was forced. So Lena did what Victor never expected her to do. She stopped fighting him in public and started speaking to institutions that didn't care about his charm. She gathered what she knew, what she could prove, what had been whispered and hidden behind NDAs and polished speeches, and with the help of a legal team that understood trust structures and corporate realities, she prepared a report. Not a dramatic one, not a theatrical one, a precise one. Cold facts, paper trails, risk exposures. Lena sent it where it belonged, to the people whose job was to listen when billionaires lied. After she hit send, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt quiet, like someone had finally closed a door that had been banging in the wind for years. Victor still smiled for cameras, still posted photos of his strong leadership, still paraded Camille at his side like a replacement wife. But something changed. Subtle at first. A board meeting postponed, a sudden dip in stock rumors, executives avoiding eye contact. Victor noticed. And when Victor noticed, he hunted. His calls became more frequent, more hostile. He demanded meetings. He threatened to expose Lena's identity as E.V. to ruin the mystique. He said he'd drag her through court until she was bankrupt. Lena listened to the threats with a calm face. Then she said softly, "Do what you need to do." Victor went silent on the line, because he could hear it too now, the hum in his own walls changing pitch. Something in his system was no longer obeying him, and he didn't know what. The fashion world is cruel, but it respects boldness. When rumors spread that E.V. might finally reveal themselves, the industry buzzed like a living wire. Invitations to the Astor Pavilion became currency. Editors begged. Celebrities offered favors. Investors watched like sharks, scenting blood. Lena didn't rush the moment. She built it, carefully. Like a designer builds a collection, each piece leading inevitably to the final look. Adrian Blackwell helped quietly, not by controlling but by opening doors and then stepping aside. "I won't protect you from consequences," he told Lena once. "But I'll make sure you're not facing them alone." Lena appreciated that. Because she didn't want to be saved. She wanted to stand. The show's theme was simple, and it made Lena's throat tighten when she named it Visible. The collection was built around transformation. Gray fabrics that looked like uniforms at first glance, then revealed hidden lining of blue like night breaking through fog. Coats that could be buttoned tight like armor, then unfolded into capes. Dresses with seams that looked restrained, then opened into movement, freedom, air. The first time Lena watched the models rehearse, she had to grip the chair to steady herself. Because she realized she wasn't just designing clothes. She was designing a narrative. One Victor couldn't control. The night of the show arrived, and as the auditorium filled, Lena stood backstage listening to the crowd's murmur. She could smell hairspray, velvet, fresh paint on sets. She could hear the sound system humming. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. A stage manager whispered, 5 minutes. Lena closed her eyes. For a moment, she saw herself in gray, standing silent beside Victor. Then she saw herself now, hands steady, mind sharp, surrounded by people who respected her craft. She opened her eyes. "Let's begin," she said. The show started. The first model stepped onto the runway in a structured gray coat, severe and clean. The second model wore a gray dress with a high collar like Lena used to wear. Then, as she walked, the collar fell back and revealed a lining of midnight blue. The crowd murmured. Phones lifted. Cameras flashed. By the third look, the theme was clear. This was not just fashion. This was confession. By the seventh look, the audience was leaning forward, hungry. And then the screen flashed E.V. A hush. Lena stepped out at the end wearing the midnight blue velvet dress, the same one from the Halcyon Museum Gala, now altered, slightly sharpened into something even more commanding. The applause hit like thunder. Lena smiled. Not for them. For the girl she'd buried in gray. She lifted a hand, and the applause softened. Then, from the side entrance movement, a figure stepping into the light, too fast, too eager, too angry to be graceful. Victor Kane. He didn't belong here. And everyone could feel it. His presence was wrong the way a scream is wrong in a library. He marched onto the runway, face tight, eyes wild, with the kind of desperation that happens when a man realizes he's losing control in public. Lena watched him approach. Her expression didn't change. Victor pointed at her. "This is fraud," he shouted, voice echoing through the pavilion. This is my wife." She's stealing," the crowd murmured. Camera operators swiveled like predators. Victor's chest heaved. "Do you know what she is?" he barked at the audience. "She's nothing, she's he." Stopped mid-rant, because he saw them. In the front row, plain clothes, still posture, eyes scanning. One of them stood and spoke calmly into a mic that suddenly made the room feel like a courtroom. "Victor Kane," the agent said. "You need to come with us." The silence was immediate. Victor blinked as if his brain refused to process words that didn't obey him. What is this?" he demanded. "Do you know who I am?" "I do," the agent replied. "That's why we're here." Victor laughed, once sharp and disbelieving. "This is her doing. She. He swung toward Lena, eyes blazing. "You set me up." Lena's voice was steady, her tone almost tender. "No, Victor." She took one slow step toward him, not threatening, not pleading, just present. "You built a system where you could do anything," she said. "You just forgot systems don't love you back." Victor's mouth opened. His hands shook. For the first time, the world was watching him without his filter, without his PR, without his scripts. Victor glanced around the auditorium, searching for an ally. Camille wasn't there. His board wasn't there. His loyal executives weren't there. Only strangers filming. Only agents closing in. Only Lena standing still like the center of a storm. The agent's partner stepped forward and gently took Victor's arm. Victor jerked away. "Don't touch me," the partner remained calm. "Sir, cooperate." Victor's breathing sped up, panic boiling under his skin. And then something ugly happened. Victor tried to smile. He tried to perform confidence like he always did. But the smile didn't hold. It fractured. It made him look insane. The audience watched horrified and fascinated. Victor shouted again, voice cracking. "She's my wife. She belongs to me." The words hit the room like a rotten smell. People flinched. Lena didn't. She looked at him with something like pity. "You never had me," she said softly. Victor's eyes widened. The agents moved in. The handcuffs clicked, and the sound was so small, metal on metal, yet it rang louder than applause. Victor was led off the runway in a stagger, his shoulders hunched, his face pale under the lights. The audience remained silent until the doors closed behind him. Then the room erupted, gasps, whispers, stunned laughter. Lena stood alone in the center of the runway, velvet catching the light like a crown. Somewhere in the dark, Adrian Blackwell watched with the calm of a man who'd seen power shift before. He nodded once, a quiet confirmation, and Lena understood. This was the end of Victor's story, and the beginning of hers. The news cycle loved Victor's fall. Kane Dynamics stock plummeted. Executives resigned, like rats fleeing a ship. Headlines that once praised Victor now dissected him. In the court filings, the words were colder than gossip, fraud, misrepresentation, violations, investigation. Victor's face appeared on screens in a way it never had before. Not lit warmly by PR photography, lit harshly by fluorescent lights. When he appeared in court, he wore a neutral suit, but the cameras captured it in a way that made Lena's stomach twist. It looked gray. Not the refined gray of expensive silk, the institutional gray of a man being processed by a system larger than him. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. The man who had forced her into invisibility was now the one becoming invisible inside a machine that didn't care about his ego. The sentencing day came months later. Lena didn't attend. She didn't need to. She read the final number in a document and closed her eyes. 15 years. Victor Kane, the man who demanded peace at home, would now live inside rules he couldn't bend. As for Camille Laurent, Camille tried to pivot, tried to rebrand herself as a victim too, but the world's sympathy was limited, and scandals burned everyone nearby. She disappeared from headlines quickly, an echo of a woman who'd mistaken proximity to power for power itself. Lena's life didn't become easy. Freedom was not a soft thing. It demanded work. It demanded decisions. It demanded she look at herself without the gray fog. But Lena had spent years building something in secret, and now she built in the open. E.V. officially debuted under Lena's real name, Lena Ashford. The reveal didn't weaken the brand. It made it stronger, because people weren't just buying clothes. They were buying the story of a woman who refused to be erased. And when the legal dust settled, when assets were restructured and partnerships renegotiated, when a failing tech empire needed new leadership and a new face the world could trust, the headlines changed again. Not because Lena chased them, because they chased her. Ashford Global announces acquisition and rebrand of former Kane assets. Lena Ashford appointed chairwoman. Some people called it revenge. Some called it justice. Lena called it reality. She didn't take Victor's empire out of spite. She took what could be saved and rebuilt it with transparency, with restraint, with boundaries Victor never respected. She hired people who valued safety. She listened to auditors. She made decisions slowly, carefully, like stitching seams that would hold under strain. Adrian Blackwell remained in the background, present, supportive, never demanding. One day, months after the sentencing, Lena returned to the penthouse in Harbor Point, not to reclaim it, not to mourn, just to collect the last remnants of her old life. The staff was gone. The rooms felt hollow. The air smelled faintly of polished stone and stale control. Lena walked into the bedroom closet. The gray dresses still hung there, perfectly spaced. She ran her fingertips over one sleeve. The fabric was smooth, expensive, empty. For a moment, she remembered standing in front of that closet, trying to convince herself she was lucky, trying to believe disappearing was peace. Lena exhaled. She didn't rip the dresses down. She didn't set them on fire. She didn't need that kind of drama anymore. She simply closed the closet door. And in that quiet click, she felt something settle inside her like a chapter ending. As she walked out of the penthouse, rain began to fall again outside. Soft at first, then steady, Lena stepped into it without raising her shoulders. Let it touch her hair. Let it darken her coat. Let it remind her of the night she walked away. In the car, she looked out at the city and heard that old hum in her memory, the sound of servers of systems. But now it didn't frighten her, because she understood something Victor never did. A system can control you only if you believe you're too small to fight it. Lena wasn't small. She never had been. She was simply hidden, and now she was visible. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever felt yourself shrinking to keep someone else comfortable, leave a message. Not for me, for you, because the moment you name what's happening is often the moment the gray begins to fade.